Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I see I'm 1 minute late, so I apologise for that. Welcome to this evening's planning meeting. My name's Councillor White, John White, and on my left I have my acting Vice Chairman, Councillor Baker. The other councillors sitting on the two side sprigs are the members who will debate and vote on the applications. On my right and left, I have officers, including the planning manager, the committee's solicitor, and other planning officers. This is a formal committee meeting, and it's important that councillors can hear the presentations and debate, and therefore I would ask that you don't interrupt any of the speakers. The order of business for planning applications tonight will be the officers first will give a presentation on the application, and then we'll have public speaking, if there is any public speaking to be taken, those people that have already notified the clerk that they wish to speak. Then we'll get any further comment from the officer, and then finally the committee members will ask questions, they'll debate the application and finally vote on it. And I should add that this meeting is being recorded by the council and will be available after a short period on the internet. Right, so if we go to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absences and any substitutions.
Mr Chairman, formal apologies for absence tonight from your Vice Chairman, Councillor Rosemary Heaney. She has not got a substitute tonight.
Right, thank you very much. And now, councillors, I'm going to ask you to turn to the minutes of your last meeting, purely in the first stages for any inaccuracies or omissions that you think should be in there, or shouldn't be in there, as the case may be. And then, if there are no indications that there are any, I have a proposal that I sign them as a true and correct vote. I have a seconder, so thank you very much. Now we go to declarations of interest of any councillors that have got disclosable interests, and that's on the items that are on the agenda tonight. Yes, I'll take councillor first.
On items A2 and A3, I live locally close to those properties, and so therefore would like to declare an interest, and so I will withdraw from the meeting for those two items.
Thank you very much. On application 12000464 at Point Clear, I have to declare that I am both the parish and the district councillor for this application, and normally it wouldn't affect me sitting on the application, but as I am predetermined on it, and so when we get to item 7, I will vacate the chair and hopefully be able to speak on the application, and following me speaking, I'd leave the chamber whilst it's debated. So that's the Point Clear one. Any further declarations? There aren't any. Right. Thank you very much. In which case we move to item 4 on the agenda. That is the major application tonight. It's planning application 17-01229. This is an outline application for land adjacent and to the rear of 755-757 St John's Road, Clacton. And turn to Suzanne.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application. It's an outline application with all matters reserved, apart with the exception of access. It's for a site which is down as to the rear of 755 and 157 St John's Road, but you may also know it as Rouse's Farm. So it's an outline application for up to 950 residential units, a new neighbourhood centre comprising of a local healthcare facility and units for shops, food and drink and or community centre, a 2.1 hectare site for a new primary school and associated roads, open space and other infrastructure. So the site comprises of 42 hectares of predominantly agricultural land and is situated on the western side of Clacton and to the north in Jaywick, and you can see it outlined in red on the site. So this shows the site is this area here, and so to the north of the site you've got properties in St John's Road. These are all a mixture of styles and types of dwellings. Referred to in the report is a Grade 2 listed building, and that's on the opposite side of St John's Road to the northeast, so that's approximately in this location here. To the west of the site is Rouse's Lane, which I believe you travelled down for your site visit this morning, beyond which is open farmland. And to the south of the site is more farmland and Sackett's Grove caravan site. The eastern boundary is properties in Jaywick Lane, and in particular members may recall granting permission on this site for a care home and a number of houses. So the site is relatively flat, but it does slope slightly towards the south, and I'll show you some photographs. Their views across the site are quite open from one boundary to the other. So this is the view looking out of the site westwards towards St Osyth, and that's looking over the south, over the site from the south. As you can see, it's predominantly flat, and that shows the views across the site from the east. And again, you'll notice that there's no significant features within the site, only sort of boundary hedgerow for the majority of the site. And that's views across the site from the northwest corner. And this shows it in context. So this is the views across Jaywick, from along Jaywick Lane. So part of the site boundary is the properties with Jaywick Lane, and otherwise it's defined by post and rail fence. This shows the neighbouring property in Jaywick Lane, and from here you can see the relationship with the education centre, so the application site's on the opposite side of the road. And this shows the views from St John's Road, and this is the area of the proposed access point. So you know it's a pair of semi-detached properties in that location, and that is the listed building, and that's referred to in the report. So this shows views around the northwest corner of the site in junctions with Rouse's Lane and St John's Road. You can see some of the surrounding development in St John's Road, which is clearly a mixture with no uniform design or appearance. And this shows the views of Jaywick Lane. So the site lies behind these properties, and again you can notice the character of the area in which you saw this morning. And finally, in terms of photos, this shows the views of the site from the west, and that's looking towards the properties in St John's Road. So you can see them in the distance of the photograph. So in terms of allocation, the site is allocated in the emerging plan, as shown in blue on the right-hand side map, and it's allocated for major residential and mixed-use development. You'll notice in the saved plan, which is here, that the site lies outside the settlement development boundary and partially within the green gap. Due to the advanced stage of the emerging plan and the fact that the proposed allocation is subject to very few unresolved objections, the council considers that the emerging plan should be given significant weight, and the council also relies on this site to boost the supply of housing in line with the government policy. So it's considered that in this case we can give the emerging plan more weight than the saved adopted plan. So this shows an indicative master plan of the site. As it's an outline application, the only points of detail under consideration are the access. So you've got 2 points of access, one from St John's Road in this location and one from Jaywick Lane. And there is a spine road that links the two accesses running through the site. And in terms of the principles that you're looking to establish, it's for up to 950 residential properties, land for a primary school, which is shown in yellow, and a neighbourhood centre, which is shown in that location. And throughout the site, you'll see by the green, you've got various areas of open space, some with equipped play areas, with the majority of open space being towards the south of the site in this location, and an area of open space along the west to provide a buffer from the agricultural land. So whilst the application's in outline, information has been provided about how the site can be developed in the form of a number of parameter plans. So this shows the building heights, and this is indicative, but as I said, it gives you some idea about how the site could be developed. So the light pink shows the sort of lower stories, so it would be predominantly 1.5 stories in that 1 to 2 stories, sorry. And potential for up to 2.5 stories. The darker pink shows that the areas will be predominantly 2 stories with potential of up to 4 stories. The exact details and heights and designs will be dealt with at reserve matters, but it's considered on a site of this scale that needs to be a variety of heights and different types of housing. Again, this shows the density plan. So this shows that the lower density will be along the edge, next to the existing residential development, and also along the edge with the farmland and the open space, with the higher density being within the centre of the site. In general, this is considered to be an appropriate development for its location. Again, this shows the open space areas a bit clearer than the other plans. So the orange stars indicate the equipped play areas, and the other open space will be attenuation areas and more informal in character. And this shows how the access and movements could be achieved through the site. As noted, you've got 2 access points shown by black arrows and the black spine road that will go through the site. The others are just indications of how roads and footpaths can link with the existing footpath connections, which are shown in yellow, and the facilities, neighbouring facilities. So it's considered there's potential for the site to provide adequate linkages. And again, this shows the parameter plan. So this is to deal with land use. So in beige, you've got the built development. Green is open space. Blue is the primary school, and pink is a neighbourhood centre. And the orange line denotes that development would be 10 metres, or approximately 10 metres away from the boundary. In principle, this is considered an adequate distance of separation and raises no concerns with officers. A development of this size will not come forward all in one go, and this shows how the site, how it's proposed to be phased. So looking at the front part of the site along St John's Road coming first, followed by the area along Jaywick Lane, and as you can see, the middle bit will be phased. In terms of accesses, as I said, we're looking at the details of the access. This is the proposed northern access onto St John's Road. And it's located east. This is the existing pair of semi-detached properties. So it's located to the east. And it's proposed that this junction will be signalised and a turn-right lane be created onto St John's Road with 2 designated pedestrian crossings. Highways have raised no objection subject to conditions, and a number of points. They've actually provided a further update, which is on the update sheet for members. And this is the access onto Jaywick Lane. So this is also proposed to be a signal-controlled crossing with a right lane created. So Highways raised no objection to the proposal, subject to conditions set out in the report, and this is to include off-site works in the surrounding area, and these are required to be carried out prior to first occupation. So the off-site works, I'll go through what they are. So it's the works to the St John's Road and Jaywick Lane mini roundabout. So on the top plan, you've got an existing, the existing mini roundabout, and improvements are to be made to increase the capacity of the roundabout by making the roundabout bigger and widening the approaches along St John's Road to allow vehicles to turn without causing congestion. And then you've got the details of the St John's Road closed lane junction, and as you'll see from the update sheet at point 2A, this is requires further scrutiny from Highways, but at present it is proposed to remove the roundabout and create a signalled junction. But this will be subject to further discussions with Highways. And then this is the St John's Road, Peter Brough Avenue junction. And again, you'll see that works are to be roundabout to create an extra lane on this. And this is a large roundabout, so the St John's Road and A133 roundabout. And this is proposed to be modified to create extra lanes on the approaches from St John's Road and London Road. So subject to these works and to the updated comments, Highways have no objection to the proposal. So whilst in outline form, officers are content that subject to the reasonable planning conditions and the obligations, that the general principle of development is acceptable, and the recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report and the update sheets, and a legal agreement which is subject to further viability, but broad heads of terms have been set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. I now turn to the public speaking element, and I do not have any members of the public or ward members wishing to speak, so I go straight to the applicant or agent, Ms Nikki Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you have before you a proposal for outline planning permission for a scheme that has been carefully considered by you when preparing your local plan and by your officers when we prepared the planning application. It comes to you following an extensive pre-application discussions with the public, this council and your infrastructure providers. We listened to the feedback we were given and made changes to the proposal to address the concerns that were raised. We met with the NHS and we helped each other to understand the healthcare potential at this site. That potential is allowed for in this scheme. The scheme will deliver a new primary school that is required to serve both the existing population needs and the future needs arising from this development. It provides a significant part of your future housing land supply and will greatly reduce the need for you to have to consider speculative developments on sites that you have not chosen. The scheme includes generous areas of open space and a variety of play provision that will help to improve the health and well-being of the community. It also delivers a new spine road through the development that will serve as a bypass for Jaywick Lane. The application has been subjected to detailed and thorough scrutiny by both your officers and the various agencies that are there to test the appropriateness of developments in your area. This has resulted in a clean bill of health from all parties and a scheme that sits before you with all technical matters resolved. Members, you can approve this scheme today, safe in the knowledge that all aspects of the potential impacts have been carefully considered and deemed to have been satisfactorily mitigated. As this is an outline application, we will need to come back to you with the detailed design of the scheme before work can commence. We will follow a similar comprehensive pre-application process to ensure that you have an opportunity to shape this new community. Members, you have a scheme that can deliver real benefits to both the community and your district, and a developer that is keen to commence implementation as soon as possible, with a proven track record of meaningful public engagement. Your officer's report provides a detailed assessment of the scheme against planning policy and clearly identifies that the scheme is compliant. Perhaps of more importance to you is the fact that the scheme is fully compliant with the allocation that you have approved for this site. This is very much a plan-led development on a site endorsed by this council. Members, the planning case to support this application is very strong, as has been articulated in your officer's report. I respectfully request that you endorse your officer's recommendation and approve this application tonight.
Thank you very much. I've turned the mic off. In which case, it's your chance to raise any questions that you want. And as far as possible, we will answer those for you before you come to a decision. So, speakers, please. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. There's an area that has quite concerned me, and I'd like some clarification, if I may, from the officer. It's in respect of the Toucan crossing, which is immediately adjacent to the school and was placed there at the construction of Bishop's Park purely because it was a known and safety factor that children will cross there. But I believe that's under threat of being removed and the new one put in some distance up. Now, am I correct in that? Yes or no, please? And the right to return.
Okay, no, that's a very good question. In the initial application and on a lot of the diagrams that accompany it, the proposal was to retain the existing crossing and to have a separate junction-controlled junction to access the site. But there's been further discussion with the Highways Department in the run-up to the committee meeting, and what Highways have now suggested is, having undertaken a safety audit of the proposal, is that they would like the condition to be worded to allow for the closure of that other, the existing crossing, and for it to be integrated into the crossing accompanying the new junction, and for the footpath along Jaywick Lane to be extended to reach that. The way that the condition would be worded would allow for both possibilities, but the indication from the County Council Highways is that they want to have the option to be able to close the existing crossing and to incorporate it into the new junction.
Right. Yes.
From the existing crossing to the new proposed crossing, what is the distance and where does it lay in relationship to the entrance of the school? And am I right in saying that the pink area, which is the health area, has not yet been decided upon, and that is where the access will sit, and that will stay 3 years in limbo, and then if not taken up by any health authority per se, then it will be returned to the developer for further development on.
Please go.
So Suzanne's just going to check the measurements for me, the distance. In terms of the pink area, the area down as a neighbourhood centre, the applicants are fully compliant with the policy because the policy requires a neighbourhood centre. In terms of a commitment to it, that will be set out in the Section 106 agreement. And when you're doing a Section 106 agreement, the terms of it have got to be reasonable to allow that development to come forward. And the terms that have been described are that the proposal would be put onto the market for a number of years. 3 is the current suggestion, but we haven't formally agreed that yet. That would be done by lawyers through the Section 106 process. It could be a longer period of time. And if there is no interest in taking on that land and occupying it for commercial or community uses, then there is the obligation to actually deliver it falls away. But that is quite standard in these planning agreements, and very often, as we saw in the St John's Road development further round, actually there was a commercial interest and a neighbourhood centre was delivered on that site.
And the distance between the existing toucan and the proposed new toucan?
It's approximately 100 metres.
Old ideas. Let me think from yards to metres. Okay, yes, I'm on that. There is a considerable distance from that, where the one that's standard now. When that was put there, and I clearly remember an eminent politician, Prime Minister, telling everybody the idea of this is that great consideration was given to this for the safety of the children crossing there, as children don't like to walk excessively long distances, and the main feeders were coming from the south, not the north, and without access by car, anyone walking up would sneak across that road, and that's why it was designed to put there. And that is the area of concern which I'm raising tonight.
Quick response on that. Actually, you're absolutely right that the crossing was placed there really to accommodate the children that were progressing up Jaywick Lane from the south and from the Jaywick area. Of course, if that crossing were to be closed and incorporated into the new junction that's proposed, it would actually be further south and nearer to those children that the original location was designed to serve. So if anything, the new junction would be more accessible to the population that it was originally designed to serve than the current one.
Thank you, Chair. That satisfies my questioning, and I'm happy with it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Benison, thank you. Sorry, sir. No, can't do that. Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a question, but I'd just like to make a comment on the item that's just been spoken about, if I may. When that crossing was built, it was for children not predominantly coming from the south, coming from the north as well, houses further up Jaywick Lane, and also going through the alleyway at the side of Wick Lodge, coming from the estates at the back. So there are children coming from all areas. So if it's moved further south, those children won't be bothered to walk south and cross and then walk north. So that's just a comment I'd like to make. But the thing I'm majorly concerned about is NHS, the NHS saying that sorry, I've got it here, healthcare requirements could be met either through a new facility on the site or through a financial contribution towards healthcare capacity in the wider area. And I'm concerned that this financial contribution for this site, if it's not taken up by NHS, will disappear into NHS coffers elsewhere in Essex, and it won't be retained for our area, which is badly needed. So I think, you know, if we were minded to approve this, I think we perhaps could say something in informative, whatever it is, that we would like that to be retained within the local area, if that's possible.
I think, without even asking the officer, we all share your views. We see what happens to 106 money. It suddenly disappears. We want this for the development in our area, and I share that. And Gary is nodding that something similar could come up.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And actually, under the regulations that control what councils can have in a Section 106 agreement, you need to ensure that any planning obligations, whether that be transfer of land or transfer of money, has got to be related to the development. So if the money is to be spent off of the site, and for the creation of healthcare facilities or capacity not on the site. It would still have to be in the locality that the site is served by, and they would be very carefully worded sections of the Section 106 agreement to ensure that the money doesn't stray from beyond the local area.
Right. Further councillors? Yes, please. Yourself.
I'm just having a quick look at the recommendations for the 106, and I'm not confused, but just want some clarification. It says there, within the 6 months, etc., provision of land on site for a new healthcare facility, etc., and then a new neighbourhood centre. The way I read the report was that they were going to be one and the same. The neighbourhood centre would be there with potentially a healthcare facility inside. Can that just be clarified, please?
Yes, that's correct. The area to be transferred to NHS England, if the terms of the 106 are agreed in that way, would be within the area that's designated as a neighbourhood centre. But the neighbourhood centre itself is also subject of its own clauses within the 106 agreement for it to be marketed to bring it forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Yes, Councillor. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm looking at the area at the bottom of the diagram where the attenuation pond is. Are we sure that the attenuation pond won't get children sort of diving into it and suffering from the ill effects of water?
Well, when you see an attenuation pond, when it's actually designed out in full, doesn't always necessarily mean a deep pond that children can fall into. Sometimes it is actually an area of undulation within the ground where the water can collect and seep away through the ground. Very often they're actually dry for most of the year, but water collects in them at times of high rainfall. One of the conditions within here is the submission of a detailed drainage plan to be approved, and the detail as to whether it would be a full-blown lake, which might have safety implications, or an indent in the ground, are a matter to be determined at another time.
Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Not so much a question, just a little bit of a statement, really. I really, truly thank the officers for all the work that they've put into this, because it's been going on for some considerable time now. We talked about the water and the various possibilities and what's happening there. Reading the report, it's all being taken control of by the officers and will come up on conditions and what have you. So, in my opinion, I will actually ask to vote in favour of the approval that the officers have given, and if you need me to, I will actually propose that.
Right, well, I'll take that as a proposal, but we'll have some further discussion before I even ask for a seconder. And again, it's not a question really, or perhaps it is. The roadway, which I think is the major part of this development as far as I'm concerned, in a discussion this morning on site, we were told about the various stages, which the officer has talked about, developing this stage first and what have you. But my understanding this morning was the first stage will be to build the road from St John's Road, and it will be well down the plan before that road is actually completed. I was rather hoping that that road would be put together quite early on. Otherwise, all the traffic is going to block up the St John's Road development. And if it takes 5 years for each stage, it could be 10, 15 years before the road actually goes all the way through. So I don't know whether Gary has got any thoughts on that.
Okay, so we've got the proposed phasing there, and that shows you sort of sections of the development and what order they propose to be building. You've got stage 1 and 1A together because the intention is to bring forward the land for the primary school at the earliest possible opportunity. The neighbourhood centre with health facility is 2A because the intention is to bring that and the open space forward soon after. The provision of the access to both areas is effectively one and the other end of the spine road that's got to be created. And one of the suggested conditions from the Highway Authority is actually worded that prior to occupation, so that's basically prior to the occupation of dwellings, it lists all of the highway obligations that have to be undertaken. And one of those includes the routing of bus services through the development site spine road, including appropriately positioned bus stops, with current infrastructure requirements to be agreed with the planning authority in consultation with the Highway Authority. So although the phasing of the development would generally be north to south, actually before the dwellings can be occupied, the road connection needs to be made in accordance with the condition that's written in here.
I would think of a development of this size, we shall need a through road rather than waiting till the very end before it's connected. That was the point I was making. But yes, I accept that the entrance from St John is the top stage and the 2A will be the entrance of the bottom stage. I'm just worried that there's no continuity between those two stages for a number of years. But that's, if I understood you correctly, you're saying before occupation of them it will be connected, then that will satisfy my needs. But
yeah, I mean that is the Highway Authority's requirement in their list of proposed conditions.
Right. Yes, Councillor.
Listening to the officer very carefully, actually, I think the proposed idea of the school is absolutely essential and needed. And given some thought to my previous statement about the health centre, as this evolves and the buildings take place, I'm sure that will grow and there would be a take-up and an interest in developing that on. So at this point, if you are looking for someone to second this, then I'm prepared to do it on the pretext that this will be a flexible, open-ended, and available for further debate later on.
Right. Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, can you go back to that one, please? 1A is the school. Is that the first thing that's going to be built, or don't we know that? Is that going to be built before the people move in it, move in the houses? The other thing is, 10, 15 years before the site's at an end, number 4 is the last part, which does hold quite a few houses. Will that school be filled up with people from the area before that's built? And if so, what will happen? Thank you.
No, that's a really, really good question because what is being proposed here is that land is provided for the construction of a school, along with a financial contribution that goes to the Essex County Council as the education authority, who will then have responsibility for building the school at the right time to ensure that the children have spaces in the school and that it serves the wider area. So under the current terms of the Section 106 agreement, I understand that up to 50 dwellings can be built without the land being transferred to the county council. So they can make a start on the development, but they can't go too much further than that until the land is serviced, it's laid out and transferred to the county council. Then the responsibility is entirely with the county council who will have a big pot of money that the developer has paid to them that will be phased over the course of the development, and the onus is on them to deliver that school at the right time using not only the money from the development but other sources of money that they have as well. And that could be money that they've already collected from other developments in the area or just their general budget for delivering schools. To answer the second question about will the school places be filled up, what is proposed is a two-form entry school which is 420 spaces. A development of this size under normal circumstances would only require a one-form entry school, 210 places, but the county council don't build one-form entry schools because they very quickly fill up and they find that they need to build another one somewhere else. So from the very outset they require enough land to build a two-form entry school which would be able to accommodate all of the children from this development and children from other developments that are proposed in the wider area, including some of the sites that are allocated in the local plan.
Councillor?
So is the building of the school going to be phased like the building of the houses?
Well, in a way, the county council would have to ensure that the school is built and operational at the right time to accommodate the children. And every year, the county council keep a close eye on the number of children on the roll and the growth in the population, how many houses are expected to be built year on year. And it's based on that they make their decision when they actually go onto the site, build the school and open it.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Right. Any further questions? Councillor Everett?
Yeah, in the presentation, I think the officer mentioned that there was a parameter plan that showed heights of buildings through the centre. Thank you. Now, I think I heard that there's a possibility that some of these buildings may be 4 stories. Is that correct? Is that something we would normally see in this sort of development?
Well, the way that the parameter plan is drawn, it's to place limits on the height of development that can happen in certain areas. So around the edges, which are perhaps more sensitive because you want a good transition between the development and the countryside, or you want a bit of a transition between the development and other people's properties, you've gone for the lower heights, so predominantly 1 to 2 storey, with the potential for up to 2.5 storey. But it would still be for this council to approve the reserve matters. But if they came in with a 3-storey development in any part of that area, then they'd be in breach of their own parameter plan, and we could quite rightly refuse that. In the darker pink area, predominantly 2-storey, so the expectation is that on the whole you will see 2-storey development there. But it does allow for up to, but no higher than 4-storey development, because around key parts of the site, perhaps around close to the neighbourhood centre or around key open spaces or close to the school, there may be scope in those areas for higher rise developments, flatted developments, townhouses, that kind of thing. And these parameters allow for that. Now, if the application comes in at reserve matter stage and it's completely awash of 4-storey development, which is totally out of character with the area and unacceptable in design terms, the council would still be within its rights to refuse that. But what we're doing at this stage is establishing some very high-level parameters to guarantee that you don't go above 4 storeys within the dark pink area, you don't go above 2.5 storeys in the light pink area.
Councillor Everett?
Thanks very much for that. That's really helpful, because my concern was that if we agreed that as a parameter now, that we'd then be stuck with it wherever. And I think what you've said to us is that when it comes back to us for reserved matters, that we will be able to limit that so that it isn't right across the whole piece. And that was my concern. Thank you.
Any further points? If there are no further points, I have a proposal of acceptance. Councillor McWilliams, and the seconder, I believe, Councillor Alexander was a seconder. So in that case, before I put it to the vote. You know what the recommendation is that you're going to vote on. It's largely at the bottom of page 11. It runs through into page 12. There has been a lot of mention made about getting the additional items that have got to be agreed. The legal agreement must be completed at the period of within a period of 6 months, and failing it being agreed within 6 months, Head of Planning is being authorised to refuse this permission. So, and there are some amendments on the green sheet, I am advised, on the back page. It's condition 8 is amended. Oh, it's the highways. Yes. Yeah. And 2A, I'm told, is properly worded on the green sheet. So you know what you're voting on. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. That application for outline permission is approved. Thank you very much. We now move on to, it's page 5, it's a planning application number 1800428. This is a full application for land adjacent to 28 Ashlyns Road, Frinton. And on the strength of that, I turn to the officer. It's...
She's going to load the PowerPoint.
Ah, right. It's just finding it. It'll be Suzanne Ennis as soon as we find it.
Right, thank you, Chair. So this is an application that's been referred to the Planning Committee at the request of Councillor Turner, and it's for a proposed dwelling on land adjacent to 28 Ashlyns Road in Frinton-on-Sea. So the application site is outlined in red, and the other land owned by the applicant is in blue on the slide. And the site is located on the eastern side of Upper 2nd Avenue, and it lies within the settlement development boundary, the conservation area, and the avenues area of special character. So this shows it in aerial form, and you can see, as you would have viewed on your site visit, that it forms part of the current garden of 28 Ashlyns Road. And in terms of the neighbouring properties, you've got 28 Ashlyns Road in this location, and the adjacent property in Upper 2nd Avenue there. So in terms of the photos, this shows the site frontage onto Upper 2nd Avenue and the adjacent property in that location. And this shows the actual corner of the site, so you can see 28 Ashlyns Road in the corner there, and that shows the open character of the area, which will be referred to later on and is referred to in the report. This shows the actual garden area, so the property will be located in approximately this area here, adjacent to that property. And that shows the existing garage and parking area for 28 Ashlyns Road, which will be retained. And this gives you an idea of the character of the surrounding area. So this is in the opposite corner plot, so the application site is just off the picture in that location. And that shows the corner plot on the south of Ashlyns 2nd Avenue. So you can see the type of development that occurs in the area. And it shows the northern boundary of the site and the flank property of 1 Upper 2nd Avenue. You notice that this doesn't form part of the application site, so this will provide separation between the existing property and the proposed property. So as you'll see from the report, there is planning history to this site and an appeal, and this is the scheme that was refused at appeal. To provide some context, this is 28 Ashlyns Road, and the proposed development was located in line with that, fronting onto Ashlyns Road. The proposal has now been relocated to approximately this area of the site, which you'll see in more detail. So, as I said, the appeal was dismissed, and the inspector considered that the proposal would result in a loss of the undeveloped corner of the site, which currently contributes strongly to the spacious character of the area. They also considered that the design would not fully reflect the design and detail of the existing houses, and felt that what was proposed, so what's shown on this slide, would appear no different to a typical modern estate dwelling of a moderate traditional style. So the appeal was dismissed on two reasons. One, the character of the area, and the actual design of the property. So moving on to what is proposed, as you'll see, the property has been located to another area of the site, which retains this open corner plot, which is what the inspector referred to. So this open corner plot is retained. The property then faces onto Upper 2nd Avenue, and this is where the plot widths are narrower and take on more of a suburban appearance. So the proposed, officer's view is that the proposed dwelling would not appear out of place. And in terms of the design, that is now what's been proposed, and you see it's completely different to what was originally proposed. The design's been amended to draw on features of nearby properties in terms of the gables to the front, and to the parapet flat roof garage, which is a feature which appears in the area. And also the materials, you've got tile hanging, which again reflects the character of the area better than what's proposed, and officers are of the view that the design is acceptable. In terms of the layout, it's a 4-bedroom property, provided with 2 parking spaces, one to the front and one in the garage, which is in accordance with the parking standards. There's also considered to be adequate garden provision. If I go back to that plot, it's also considered that the proposal would not result in any significant impact on the neighbours due to the distance and the orientation. So the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you very much. Now I have no member of the public speaking in favour, no against, no parish or town council representative. However, the ward member, Councillor Turner, has asked, and in writing, that Councillor Fairley should come and express his views.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow members and officers. So, as John explained, I'm delivering this on behalf of Councillor Turner. Firstly, I object to the description of the proposal. It is not land adjacent to 28 Ashlyns Road. It is part of the garden of 28 Ashlyns Road. I do not believe that the application should have been accepted with this description. Thus, the original developers of Frinton-on-Sea laid out the template for development with the 2 separate plots, 28 and 26, as part of Ashlyns Road. The owner of the original house at 28 also bought the next door plot, 26, which is why the adjacent house on the opposite corner is plot 24. This was quite common practice in the avenues. The houses were then designed to accommodate and reflect their positions. In later years, this was understood. It was to maintain and enhance this area of Frinton-on-Sea, and policies were written to reflect this heritage. Therefore, any reduction of a site is the opposite of preserving, let alone enhancing the area. That does not mean part of the area, but all of it. It must be all of the garden of 28 Ashlyns Road, not part. The line was drawn, and that can be seen in the policies for conservation areas and in the old plan FWK 5, the avenue areas of special character, which have been reproduced in our emerging plan as PPL 12. The MPPF states in Chapter 12, Conserving and Enhancing the Historic Environment, paragraphs 1 to 6, local planning authorities should identify and assess the particular significance of any heritage asset that may be affected by a proposal, including by development affecting the setting of a heritage asset. 132, significance can be harmed or lost through alteration or destruction of the heritage asset or by development within its setting. 133. Where a proposed development will lead to substantial harm to or total loss of significance of a designated heritage asset, local planning authorities should refuse consent, unless it can be demonstrated that substantial harm or loss is necessary to achieve substantial public benefits that outweigh that harm or loss. I fail to see the substantial public benefits that would arise from this proposal. In old-fashioned speak, it's simply garden grabbing. It will not enhance or maintain this area of tendering. It will only dumb down and reduce what should be protected by the NPPF and our own policies and plans. Therefore, I would ask you, please, to refuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the agent, Mr. Peter Legree.
Thank you, Chairman. Members. Members, in this instance, you've just heard from Councillor Fairley that, in fact, this was two plots, plot number 26 and number 28, and you'll see from the Ordnance Survey that there is no number 26. So this was always identified as being a development plot back in the time that the Avenues area was laid out for housing purposes. Obviously, events have moved on from there, and the character of the area has long been established as one that is quite unique. What members need to ask is what harm or loss of heritage asset is being caused by this development. You do need to look at this application on its particular merits. Where is the harm being caused? It is inside the conservation area, only just. The boundary is just a minute to the north. But unlike the scheme previously dismissed on appeal, this does retain the open corner aspect and also the hedgerow around the majority of the frontage of the site. So it still retains that aspect, that character of Ashlyns and the junction with 2nd Avenue. It ensures that the dwelling that's now been proposed fronts onto Upper 2nd, which is common with the plot almost directly opposite this site. So therefore, the harm and the impact that will be caused will be very limited. The presentation on behalf of Councillor Turner talks about the significant public benefits that are generated. That will be the case if this was causing the loss of an existing dwelling or perhaps developing a very prominent corner element to it. Neither of that applies in this particular instance. I think what is amazing is that once you have the objections from the Town Council and from Councillor Turner, for the Avenues of Frinton, we would normally expect quite a mailbag of objections to any scheme for any new housing. There is not one single letter of objection from any of the local residents, and I believe that really reflects the attitude of the surrounding community towards this particular scheme, that there is not going to be any harm caused. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The officer wished to add any comments to that? No? Right. In that case, councillors, it's in your hands. Yes, Councillor Brown.
My comment would be that the size of the house and the size of the garden, percentage-wise, if you look to all the other houses, it's rather small. And on the original application, the whole of that plot was given over to that house. I just feel that if that garden was a little bit larger, say another 25% of that plot, it would be more in keeping with the rest of the houses and the area. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Further comments? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
May I ask, again, what is the amenity space around the property, please?
The size of the amenity space is shown as 135 square metres, and for a property of that size, the standards are 100 square metres.
Good.
That would be the proposed finished building 135, or is it, as it stands now, as an open plot?
Yeah, so that would be the application site is shown as this boundary, so the level of amenity would be 135 square metres.
Finished one, yeah. Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, we're talking about Frinton here. It's been built with specifics in mind, I think, when it was originally built, was for room, plenty of room for different houses. But most of them have plenty of room. And I believe if you agree to this, it will definitely start a precedent that people will want their sons, their daughters to move in next door to them, so they are put in for building a house in the garden. And I believe, I don't know if this is the first one, it's the first one I've seen, that this would become prolific if we allowed it to happen. So I'm going to refuse it as far as I'm concerned, but that's what I believe. Thank you.
Right. Nobody's indicated. My understanding was that this was a spare piece of land which originally in the layout was being left for a property. The inspector didn't like properties being built on the corner, but he had no objections as long as the property had been moved back, and probably he didn't like the design for Second Avenue, but the design for First Avenue would seem to fit the bill when we looked at adjacent properties. My own personal view, I don't know whether the officer wished to comment on that. It seems that number 28, from what we've heard, bought up this piece of land at some time or other, and that's why the road is numbered so that 24 is the other side, he's number 28, and the spare land was to have been number 26 in the original design. That's the way I'm reading it, but officer might care to comment on that, I don't know.
I mean, in terms of the numbers, I can't comment on what was posed at the time of it being built, and to a certain extent, it's not a material planning consideration in terms of what you've got in front of you this evening. You have a proposal, and you have a previous proposal that has an appeal decision which sets out the concerns it's had. So it's the member's judgment about whether that, what is now proposed, overcomes those concerns. It's almost regardless of whether it was originally a plot, we couldn't use that as a reason for refusal if it was or wasn't.
Right. Further comments? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at where the access is on, I can just say, borrow your cursory thing, is that the tree there? And if so, it mentions about 3 metres. The highway should run a lot less than 3 metres. I just wonder if the access is going to have an impact on that tree, because there were concerns this morning. Thank you.
Any further points while Suzanne's looking that up? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
To the officer, please, Chair. The agent stated to us that 28 and 26 are 2 separate units, and 28 bought 26. I might have got that wrong, but that's how I interpreted it. So what, I wonder what was in 26. Obviously we can't go back that far, but what was in 26 at the time? And looking at 28, who purchased that with the intent of buying a piece of land separate to that property. So the space of 28 falls with the fact they need a lot of space. I'm finding it quite difficult to understand what the problem with the application is, and I'm wondering if it went further than this place, how that would be, and can we afford yet another appeal failure? So.
Suzanne's still trying to find the distance between the tree and the suggested exit.
Right, the width of that access shown is actually greater than what is shown by highway, so it wouldn't be affected.
Thank you.
It wouldn't be affected.
Thank you.
Right. Further speakers? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm puzzled as to why this was described as an open corner, because there's an extremely high variety of yew hedge going all the way around, so it's not particularly open anyway. I don't see that this particular application would have any, would create any problems on that corner, and if it does come up, if there's nobody else that wants to refuse, I would like to propose that we accept this.
Right, so I've got two proposals on the floor, neither of which have yet been seconded. Do we want any further debate? No wishes any further debate, then I'll, as Councillor Holmes got his in first, I'll ask...
I'll take mine out. I'll just vote against
you withdraw yours, right? So we now have a proposal for acceptance, and do I have a seconder for that? I do have a seconder for that. Thank you very much. Anything anybody wishes to add to it? No, in which case I'll draw your attention to the recommendations. The conditions are at the top of page 51. So you know what you're voting on. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And me, 8.
8.
Yep. So that application is approved.
You probably should ask for any votes against. Chair.
I should, to be technically correct, I suspect Councillor Holmes will either be an abstainer or voting against. Voting against, right? Thank you for that. So the record is there and it is approved.
No,
Richard's out. And Richard's out. Right, so now we move on to agenda item 6. It is application number 18/00418 full. Again in Frinton, this time it's Stocksfield, 1st Avenue, Frinton. And it's a development which is proposed wrought iron gates. So, Graham is coming to take this hot one. Right, thank you. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. And good evening, members. This is a application for a single wrought iron gate. This is the site itself. I believe you will have seen the site on your site visits this morning. You'll be aware this is where the access point is itself. As you will have noted from the locality, the majority of the properties in this area are set within, are good-sized properties, good-sized dwellings set within fairly extensive gardens. It's a relatively open area in the way it's laid out. Although you've noted from the application site, there is a fairly mature laurel hedge around the outside of the site. And again, this is just the overhead, which gives, I think, that view of the, as you know, the site is on the edge of the town, and it's as a relatively open locality. This is the site itself. Again, you'll have picked up there's been some building work at the site. I believe there was a recent scheme for extensions and alterations, which is currently ongoing. You'll note the position of the laurel hedge, and the new gate position will be set a metre or just inside the back of the laurel hedge. So this is, again, another view of the entrance, and then another view of the hedge. And just a view of other properties in the locality. Again, you will have picked up from your site visit, other properties do have fairly mature hedging and planting within their front gardens, but it is generally sort of open in character in terms of the nature of the locality. So this is the proposed plan. As you'll note, it's a single gate, which in effect slides sideways when it's opened behind the existing hedge. And as noted, it's set in a metre from the edge of the footpath. And that's the proposed elevation. Again, as the description says, it's a wrought iron gate to be painted black. It'll be 1.75 metres at its highest point, which is to the left-hand side, and then 1.6 to the right-hand side of the gate. As noted, it simply slides sideways when it's being opened. That's it, Chairman. Thank you. Recommendation is to approve.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, again, no member of the public speaking either for or against the application. Nothing from the Town Council. So I can invite Councillor Fairley to come forward in her position as Councillor Turner's spokesman.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Councillor Turner's words. Very few houses in the conservation area and the avenue area of special character have closed off frontages. The same can be said of Frinton-on-Sea in general. This is just one of the many reasons that make Frinton, well, Frinton. We do not adopt defensive and close-minded attitude to our properties or our town. All are welcome. Thus, any gate, wall over 1 metre fronting the highway requires planning permission. More so in a conservation area, and in particular in the avenue areas of special character. A similar application by the golf club earlier this year was refused. This part of First Avenue is particularly characterised by openness. Every house has an open aspect. This is noted in the Tendring District Council Conservation Area Review 2006-13. The southern end of First Avenue includes more modern developments, including this cul-de-sac. Their more open aspect gives rise to views over the countryside to the west, with public footpaths linking to Great Holland. In fact, the start of the arrow showing the open aspects to be protected starts in the front of Stocksfield. This proposal is out of keeping with the street scene. The NPPF, paragraphs 131, 132 and 137, have particular significance in reasons for refusal. 131, new development in the conservation area should enhance and better reveal the heritage asset, Stocksfield. This has the opposite effect. 132, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation, and that significance can be harmed and lost. I believe that by agreeing to this enclosure, you will be harming and losing part of this conservation area. 137, any new development should enhance or better reveal their asset's significance. This property has undergone a major refurbishment and brought it into the 21st century. I applaud the developer. He has done and is doing a good job. We are custodians of our properties, and as we age, so does the property. Every so often, as properties change hands, so a newer and younger owner updates and redevelops. This must be done, as the NPPF states, in keeping with its surrounds and thus maintaining and enhancing the local scene. This proposal fails to do that. Therefore, please refuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the applicants, Mr. O'Fallon.
Thank you, Chairman, councillors and officers of the council. I'm here to speak on behalf of myself for the application and my family who live in First Avenue. I'm not a developer. This is my home. The scheme offers no significant impact on the conservation area. The proposed gate is politely designed, of an appropriate scale and finish, in order to complement the host property. The professional planning officer's recommendation or comments are that there will be a slight visual improvement and a neutral effect on the surrounding property. There is a large number of gates within the avenues, in First Avenue and Second Avenue in particular. At Stanhope, next to Councillor Turner's property, is large-scale gates. Opposite his is 21. They have gates, iron gates, that are of a greater scale than mine, but they have the blacked-out iron behind them. And I think that does lead to a visual loss for the street scene. But if you look at the other properties at Cortlands and Ruster Lodge in First Avenue, there are gates. Ruster Lodge sits at the top of my cul-de-sac, and there are large gates higher than the gates that I'm proposing. As well as the gates at Stanhope and the gates at number 21 in Second Avenue, there are also gates at 48. There are gates at 58. There are gates at 59. There are gates at 71. And there are gates at 80, which is a very grand house. When you go past these properties and actually look, you see through the gates to the courtyards and the driveways and the cars that are beyond them. And I think in some cases they look quite appropriate in terms of planning and enhancement to the area. There are other areas within Frinton, such as the corner of Ashlyns Road and up Forth, where you see the whole garden boarded in to a very high level, and that does, I think, create a lesser visual amenity and a negative effect on the conservation area of what was originally intended. The reason for my application is simple. We have been the subject of 4 opportunistic crimes of people coming late at night, walking past the open entrance. They've been caught on CCTV, and the police said that a gate would help to deter that opportunistic crime. And the application wasn't originally part of the full application. It was simply made at a later date based on the police advice and the security of my family. And I thank you for your time in hearing me.
Thank you very much, sir. I don't think the planning manager will want to add anything to that one.
No, Chairman, I think that was fairly comprehensive. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Councillors, it's up to you. We saw this morning, and we saw how such a gate would, when it's opened, would be completely hidden by the existing hedge. And you've heard what Mr. O'Phelan has said about other gates in the area. Right, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering, under 6.12, it mentions about a heritage statement, and the comments that have been made there, are they reflecting from the actual statement that was actually made? If I could just ask officers that.
Chairman, we'll just check that, if that's okay.
Right, whilst we're checking, any further points? Yes, Councillor Holmes.
From what I can see with this, I am assuming that it's not really going to be closed during the day. You know, closed as in stopping entry. So it's mainly going to be closed at night when, as Mr. Phelan said, if there are opportunistic people walking about, it would definitely deter them. And I can't really see a problem with this, but I'll carry on as it goes.
Right. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Although I can clearly see Councillor Turner's point of view, it's all to do with the march of progress, isn't it, really? People want to live in a secure environment. They want to have the right to be able to come and go from their property when they want, and to live in a property that I believe is in keeping with them themselves, which was made abundantly clear by the applicants addressed to us all here tonight. Insurance, crime. And if we look at progress within Frinton, many of the great stately houses in some of those avenues have been split into 4 or 5 flats. It's progress, and that we can't beat that back. So I am minded to go for approval on this. If anyone wishes to add anything other, I will step aside.
Right. Do we have the answer? Yes, we do.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The paragraph 6.12 isn't a direct sort of lift from the heritage statement. I can read you the conclusion to the heritage statement if that would help. It's just a short paragraph. Yeah. So it states, it's concluded that the proposed wrought iron gate is in accordance with the provisions of the MPPF and the development plan policies, having had regard to all material considerations. The new gate would have no significant or irreversible resultant detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, residential amenity, highway safety or biodiversity interests. The design approach is perfectly acceptable for the purpose it is intended to serve and of a similar form to that of other gates erected in the town, which does reflect what the Speaker said.
All right. Any further points? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. While we were on the site visit this morning, I did have a look at the frontage of some of the other properties in the area, and as the applicant did state earlier, there are other properties there with gates, large gates, and I don't have a problem with this application, so I'm happy to second the proposal to approve as per Officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
No further points, in which case we've got a proposer and a seconder, and the recommendations included just a 3-year time limit and to sticking to the approved plans. So with that in mind, those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much. That is unanimous, so that application for the gates is approved. Yes, please. She's gone. And I shall leave you now. And Ian as well, please. Thank you, colleagues. I shall, once Councillor Everett's back, I shall leave now and hopefully be able to speak from the floor. Thank you.
Members, we have a slightly unusual position here. Obviously, normally when a chairman is unable to act, his or her vice chairman would step in. As it happens tonight, your vice chairman, Councillor Heaney, is not with us tonight. So for this one item only, we need a formal mover, seconder and a vote to elect one of the company present to take the chair for this item. Councillor McWilliams. Sorry.
Thank you. I'd like to propose Councillor Andy Baker as our chairman for the evening.
Are there any other nominations? No. Could I just have a quick show of hands then, please? Yeah, that's a comfortable majority. So Councillor Baker's elected chairman for this one item only. So don't get too comfortable, Councillor Baker.
I don't intend to. I've got a big act to follow. Okay, this is agenda item 7, planning application 18/00464, 138 Colne Point, Clear Bay, and its replacement dwelling following demolition of existing.
Thank you, Chairman. As we've just noted, this is the site itself. You'll have been to the site this morning to look at the site. It's, as it states within the officer report, it's a mixed-use area of holiday chalets and more permanent residential properties. So this is the site in question. It's obviously set on a corner plot on quite a visible site. So again, this is just looking from the aerial view, and it gives you perhaps a better indication of what the adjoining properties are like. You have a bungalow immediately to the north of the site, and then a slightly larger chalet bungalow immediately to the west. You'll note that has a conservatory on the rear to it, and obviously the rear there are two small rear gardens serving those adjoining properties. So this is looking at the existing site. It's a fairly poor quality single story property at the moment, mainly used as a holiday accommodation. You'll see the adjoining chalet. Just for members' information at this point, it's approximately 6.1 metres in height to the ridge of the chalet. So I think we'll come back to that probably later on. That's looking towards the north, and the bungalow to the north. And again, for members' information, that's approximately 5.1 metres in height to the ridge of that. So this is to the rear of the existing property. Again, it's the sideways view, if you like, towards the existing bungalow to the north. So it is in a relatively close proximity to the existing property. And then looking back towards the main chalet itself, you'll have picked up from your site visit, the chalet has an entrance at first floor level as shown here. And again, the existing property, probably about 1.5 metres from the boundary with the chalet. So that again is the view as you look from what I think is known as New Way. That's the view you would have of the site. And again, just for members' information, and again you've picked up from your site visit, there are a number of properties in the area which are 2.5 or 3 stories in height, and there's a couple of examples just further along the Western Promenade. So that's just the existing development, as noted. Just a single-story holiday chalet, probably not built of great materials, and built well over half a century ago, and probably certainly coming to the end of its lifetime. So I think replacement with a new build would be appropriate. This is the proposed site layout of the dwelling we're now looking at. Again, we'll see in a minute, but the proposed property has a ground floor which accommodates a garage with 2 parking spaces, and there's an additional parking space provided alongside the property. You'll see the extent of the proposed amenity area which would serve the existing property, and again it shows the relationship with the adjoining properties. I think members again on the site visit this morning did wish to have an indication of the existing footprint, which is shown here in pink, and then the proposed dwelling is shown in the darker colour, so that shows the relationship. So it is slightly closer to the western boundary. As you can see, it's now about 1 metre from that boundary, and it is set slightly further back, probably not as far as the end of the conservatory, which is probably just slightly further out. But obviously it is sited further from the northern boundary. So that's the proposed scheme. It's built in what's known as a gambrel style, or similar to a mansard style roof. Again, which is reflective of similar style in the locality. It's built over 3 stories. As I mentioned, at ground floor, because of flood risk reasons, it's deliberately been designed with just garaging and a utility room at ground floor level, then with internal steps leading up to the first floor. There you have 2 bedrooms, a dining room and a bathroom. The windows on this side, which face towards the bungalow, or in fact they partially face towards the bungalow, but also to the road. The window at the top of the stairs is an obscure glazing, but the bedroom window isn't in obscure glazing. You then go up to the second floor, which is in effect an open plan lounge area. You have a high level window at that point, which again cannot be viewed because of the height above floor level. You also have a number of roof lights or Velux windows, again at high level, which can't be viewed out. The main viewpoint from the top floor would be, as you can see, from the balcony and the sort of patio door arrangement. So that's the key lighting or key visual point from that level. As members are aware, it has been members before in different forms. This one was a contemporary design, refused by members again because of the nature of the design and I think the proximity to the site frontage, and that was refused in 2016. There was a delegated refusal, which is this scheme, not dissimilar in terms of style to the current scheme before you, but as you'll have noted, it was set very, very close to the site frontage, and on those grounds was unacceptable. That's it, Chairman. On balance, we consider the application is recommended for approval. I think the reasons for that, you're aware that clearly this is a key flood risk area. We're keen to also see an upgrade to properties of this nature within the locality of the area. I think it is a larger property than perhaps would normally be acceptable on a site of this size, but I think taking into account the flood risk issues and the nature of the existing property, it's an on-balance recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, we don't have anybody from the public speaking for or against, nobody from the parish / town council, but we do have both ward members. Councillor White, and I'm sure you know the routine.
Thank you very much, Chairman and colleagues. I don't think I shall take anything like my 5 minutes. So, in 1953, those who remember, was the Great Flood. And as a very young lad, I saw the devastating results. In particular, no more than 100 yards from this property, 2 people were drowned in a single-storey dwelling. In 1960, that was Tendring Rural District Council, allowed for a lot of single-storey properties for summer use only. Since then, of course, the parish council's been asked by all sorts of people what their views were on these single-storey properties, and we've always said, if you would consider a second storey built on the properties, it would allow an escape area to be used when the next flood comes. And believe me, it will. I hope not in my lifetime, but it's bound, the way things are working out at the present moment, there will be another one. And the parish council's views have been to support anybody if they went 2 stories high. Now, today, this application is for 3 stories. It's far too big at 8 metres high. That's 1.8 metres, you've heard, above the chalet bungalow next door, and nearly 3.5 metres higher than the adjacent single-storey property. It's far too big. So I ask you to consider that. And I have to say, I was somewhat shocked about paragraph 1.4, the officer's summary. It asks you not to be drawn and to consider setting aside the normal planning concerns in order to set the tone for future regeneration. Councillors, that's not your job, setting the scene for something to come. You must consider it under the existing terms of planning conditions at the present moment. And so I don't think that was very good advice, unusually, from our officers to tell you to cast those mentions out. Councillor, it's far too big. I won't bother to go and quote the recommendations that are in both the old and the new plan, but they should not allow this development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
Begin? I have to hurry through this. I can do it in 4 minutes, 13 seconds. So I know I've got it there. I'm Councillor Michael Talbot, and I wish to speak in opposition to the recommendations before you to approve this application at 138 Colne, Point Clear. The application is only before you tonight because it's from a councillor, and our rules of procedure dictate that such applications from members and employees of the council must go to the committee and not be dealt with using officers' delegated powers. Thank goodness for that, because if it wasn't for that, this application would be approved, done and dusted. Instead of that, it's before you, colleagues. This is the third application on this site, and each one has been strongly opposed by the parish council, including myself as district council member. It seems to me that each successive application is altered so insignificantly that it does little to satisfy the objections to the earlier refusals. I think the application represents a considerable overdevelopment of a quite small site, and to accommodate such a development, the proposed structure has been brought forward closer to the boundary of the site, which, being a corner site, seriously obstructs the view of vehicle drivers exiting Western Promenade into New Way, or vehicle drivers coming from New Way into Western Promenade. If this problem presented itself outside the bay, Essex County Council Highways Authority would be most likely to intervene, commenting on the papers before you. But all the roads in the bay are in private ownership and nothing at all to do with Essex County Council other than the public footpaths. We are the Highways Authority living in the bay for our roads. How the officers came to recommend it is beyond my comprehension. I just can't think it possible that they've copped out under what might be a succession of further applications. On page 66, the report says, therefore, the absence of any objections from the Environment Agency and Essex County Highways in weighing up the advantages of the development against the disadvantage, the application is recommended for approval. Is that intended to confuse members? I just said now, it's nothing at all to do with Essex County Highways, and they themselves admit it. So what help is that towards deciding an approval? It's nothing to do with Essex County Council Highways. They're all private roads. Also note, the Environment Agency have said no adverse comment to make. But their report says the area is 1 in a 200-year flood risk. And that's what we think, as a council, is so bad that we're issuing enforcement notices on many dozens of properties in the bay just round the corner. Yet on this thing, the Environment Agency are quite happy. I ask the questions, how can the officers recommend approval when the application is so little different to the previous two applications in terms of the reasons they were rejected? What matter is so significant in this third set of plans that dictates a change from the previous rejections? What is it in this proposal that makes it okay? St Osyth Parish Council has strongly objected to both the previous two applications, as it does again to this current application. It can see little difference between any of them. As members, we get deluged with QLs, HGs, TRs, SPs, LPs and even PPLs. But we're elected members supposed to represent the views of the people that we represent and elected us. And sometimes we have to make our own decisions based on our gut feeling. If you want reasons for rejection, which I'm urging you to do, then what about significant overdevelopment on a very restricted site? The proposed building line would seriously obstruct the line of sight, the vision of motorists used in Western Promenade and New Way, many of whom are holiday makers on the Orchards Caravan Park with no knowledge of the road layout at all. Reject this recommendation and approve and vote against acceptance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I just wonder if the officer has any comments with regard to what's been said. Thank you.
Not at this stage, Chairman. No, thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm afraid to say I've got to go back to page 66, 1.4, which that paragraph is deeply concerning me. This morning I tried to discuss this, maybe not in the right environment, but here, this is the right time to do this. My fear is that we are setting a precedent in as much as when the officers are advising the committee to consider whether this approach is justified and to set aside the normal planning concerns. The way I'm reading this and maybe misinterpreting what is being said, which I will gladly alter my views, is that you're asking us to set aside planning rules and regulations in order to facilitate this building to go ahead so that it sets a tone. I agree with the first speaker from the floor that we are not in a position to set that tone. We are here as representatives of our wards and elected to sit on this committee to enact that role. And I think that's the role that we should be doing and not sliding into this. The precedent that could be set is the fact is that if other members or other people and residents come forward with applications, will you also set aside the normal planning concerns in order to facilitate their building and their buildings? This is a grave concern, and that whole paragraph, I believe, should not have been in this agenda tonight. Do I believe it's an over-ambitious development? Yes. Yes, I do. I profoundly believe that what is spoken tonight, some very emotive, some of a more gentle spiel, but nevertheless, the message is the same, is that the local people there don't want it. It's going to be far outstretching what's needed, and I think that we should be looking for refusal on this application.
Thank you. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to explore three areas, if I may. The first one is around design and visual impact. Can I ask the officers, please, what their view is of the overall height, bulk and forward sighting of the property, and whether perhaps it might be significantly taller than those around, and in fact wholly out of character with the section of the street. Is that something you would agree with?
Chair, I think just going back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of heights, we can certainly compare those heights. As I mentioned earlier, there's the chalet to one side is 1.85 lower in height than the proposed dwelling. The bungalow to the north is 2.85 metres lower. So there is a distinct difference in terms of height between the properties. I think just coming back perhaps to touch on what Councillor Talbot was talking about in terms of the officer recommendation. What we're looking at, I think, is probably on what we refer to as the planning balance, and looking at the need to perhaps, significantly improve a dwelling on the site which probably wouldn't meet today's requirements and certainly would be vulnerable to flood risk. I think that's where, from an officer perspective, we probably are more content with the overall scale of this structure than probably on a different site, shall we say. It helps to overcome the issue in terms of flood risk and removes a vulnerable building from the locality. Clearly, there needs to, for any new dwelling in this location, you need to be looking at flood prevention in terms of its design. So I think any sort of new dwelling would have at ground floor either parking or, in this case, parking a utility room. That, by its nature, forces up the height of the building and the amount of accommodation that you can actually fit into the dwelling. I think, hence, that's why we've ended up with quite a bulky structure. I agree, it is bulky, and it will, look differently to certainly what's on the site at present. But I think taking into account, the need to perhaps look for a better design in this specific locality compared to what's there at the moment, I think that tipped the balance towards recommending approval for the scheme. But certainly I do agree, it is a bulky structure. Yes, I agree with that.
Thank you for that. So perhaps you'd agree with the previous officer's view on the second application that described it as a visual intrusion to the detriment of visual amenity and therefore contrary to the aforementioned local and national planning guidance. Anyway, moving on to private amenity space. We have a policy, Safe Policy HG9, which states that 3-bedroom properties should have a minimum of 100 square metres of private amenity space. The comment was made in the second officer's report, the second application, for 71 square metres. It's slightly more now, but it isn't 100 square metres. That due to the orientation and siting, that the rear of the 3-storey property would be in shadow, and for the majority of it, leaving it unusable as private amenity space. So could you comment, please, on whether you feel that the amenity space in that circumstance is appropriate or not?
Chairman, I think this particular scheme is actually for 2 bedrooms, and there's a slightly lower amenity threshold for that. I think for 2-bed properties it would be 75 square metres of amenity space. This has got 76 square metres, so it just tips the balance on that. I think that probably goes back to the previous reasons for refusal, that it was simply overdevelopment in terms of the number of bedrooms being proposed. So it wouldn't have met that criteria. This one does, in terms of amenity space.
Thank you. And the last one, residential amenity. In terms of overlooking, the rear of the proposed building overlooking both sides, both to the north and to the west, and particularly the overlooking of number 139, where the distance between the building and the edge of the plot is only 9 metres. The comment was made then that would have significant detrimental impact on number 139. Do you amend your view in this as to change on that?
I think, Chairman, as you can see from the proposed block plan, it's been set as far from 139, I think, as possible. So I think there is an improvement in terms of the impact in terms of 139, but it is accepted there is still some impact in terms of outlook from that property. So it's not totally overcome that issue, but there is still some impact, certainly.
Councillor Holmes.
Well, here we go again. Third time lucky. There's one particular, well, 2. 6.4, page 69, and 6.7, page 69. The site is located within a flood risk zone, but is protected by current sea defences. Okay? And it is proposed that the property would be lived in all year round and not just on a holiday basis. Now, that is a back door to living in these holiday lets. As far as I'm concerned, we should not be letting these places be built if they're going to be built as residential properties. One, there's nowhere for anyone to go. If they want to go shopping, they want to go out, they've got to do at least 8 to 10 miles before they even get to a village pub. You know, so if they want to go out or anything else, they've got to use their cars. There's very little public transport down there. And after, I think, 10 o'clock, you can't get any public transport anyway. I don't know how many times this will be coming for us, but all the other reasons for refusal are still there. And my main one is that it would be lived in all the year round, when there's people that are having eviction notices brought up against them already. So we're actually saying to them, as a council, well, look at this one. If you all decide to build this, you can live in it all year round. Why are we taking them to court in the first place? I just can't get my head around this particular application. This is the third time. I don't know what the problem is. We refused it the first time, you refused it the second time, and now all of a sudden, everything that I look at in here is, oh, well, now it's slightly different. Now it's different here. Accommodates the dwelling application, represents a replacement property. There is general presumption in favour of development in principle. Yeah, in principle. Holiday let for holiday let. You know, it doesn't matter how many stories it is, it's a holiday let area. And it's, everywhere I go through it now, it's different. I haven't got the last one, but I was sitting on that last one. And all the reasons that were given for not allowing it are still in here, but they've been slightly, you know, tweaked. And I can't get my head around that because there's no different. So I'm with whoever's going for disapproval, for a refusal. Sorry.
I'll just let Charlotte make a comment.
Just a bit of a summary of a couple of things, really, that have just been picked up on the speakers. The enforcement action that a few of you have referred to is not a material planning consideration, and you need to put that to the back of your mind when you're looking at this, because you're looking at this as a dwelling in its own right, the application on its own right. Obviously, it's an application for a very different type of dwelling to those that we're looking at on the enforcement action, and that is not a consideration here, so you need to not be taking that into account when you're making your decision. The other thing is, just picking up on a couple of points that I think Graham's already covered anyway, but you have got an obligation to consider policies regarding flooding. They are definitely material planning considerations, and that, I believe, is what the officer's referring to when it's talked about putting sort of to one side some of the other planning policies. Normally, it's about a planning balance, isn't it? So planning policies regarding flooding and protection of people against flooding is relevant when you're looking at determining this. So you just need to remember that obviously that's part of what they're asking you to look at in your planning balance.
Hang on, I'll come back in a minute, John. I've got two other people. I've got you, Linda. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. I take on board what you've said, but unfortunately, once again, it's not how I'm reading 661.4. What I am concerned about is that the area, in that particular area, is subject to a lot of small properties, holiday lets, etc., a mix. I believe some were approved and given permission by previous inspectors. What I'm concerned about mainly is this bit where we will set aside the normal planning concerns in order to facilitate a development that can help set the tone. Are you saying then that if an application came from maybe someone who is living in that environment, who is facing, and let's face it, to you it might not be an importance, but to us it is. As local members, we have to take every balance into consideration. If somebody else was to put an application in, not dissimilar to this one, would they get the privilege of setting aside the normal planning concerns in order to facilitate them to build up from what they existingly have? That was my question.
I don't know whether Graham might want to comment as well in a minute, but I would just like to clarify that I didn't say the enforcement action wasn't important. What I've said is when you're sitting here as a member of the planning committee, you're sitting as a member of the planning committee, not an individual ward member. So you need to remember that you are sitting with a different planning hat on, and that enforcement action is not part of your consideration when you're sitting as a member of the planning committee. I'll let Graham comment on the slight wording of that section, because I think we're getting very hung up on a couple of words. And I think it's about taking everything into account. It's the planning balance. You're all very good at looking at all the different issues, and it's a matter of judgment as to how you want to give each of those matters priority. So obviously the officer's given their planning judgment and they've come up with their recommendation. You are entitled to tip the balance a different way based on what your own views are, as long as you've considered everything. So I'll just let Graham comment and add as he would like.
Right to reply now, please, Chair. Can I have the right to reply?
Would you like to hear the officer's reply to your question first, and then? Certainly.
Chairman, just very briefly, I think here we are talking about a replacement dwelling. I think that's the big difference here, within a group of dwellings, quite clearly. So I think that's different probably to the other sites we're referring to. I think so. I suppose and it's a well-worn phrase. You have to look at each site on its own merits. I suppose that's what it comes down to. Clearly, as far as this particular site is concerned, we do think that it's worthy of redevelopment, but clearly for members it's going to be whether the scheme before you is acceptable or not. So I think that's the response, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I reply? At the construction of the last service and overview and scrutiny, we were briefed by the Chief Executive, who made it abundantly clear that on such committees as such, you come out of your wards and into the district, and you act as a district councillor in all respects. My comments to you was acting as a district councillor elected to represent the district as a whole. I'm not the ward councillor, no, but I still see that there is an error in this, and I'm glad you've explained it to us. Now I can see the clarity in it, and I understand, I think, where you're coming from. Am I satisfied? Not particularly, and I still stand with my refusal.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. Should probably need some advice from the legal officer here, but I'd like to make a proposal to the committee that is somewhat unorthodox. We have seen this come to us now in various guises 3 times, once under delegated powers, twice to this committee, and comments made around the table. How many more times is it going to come? And I think there is an issue here as to whether we should be considering this at all. And the reason why I say that is because there is a standard, as I remember it when we were doing training with Kath Bicknell, that if an applicant keeps putting in the same application in again and again, albeit with little tweaks, then eventually the council can turn around and say, we're not prepared to determine it because it is actually the same application again and again and again. Which leads to my proposal. I would like to propose that this committee does not determine this application, and that by not determining it, the applicant has the right, obviously, to take it to the Planning Inspectorate for consideration. Because I think I'm certainly getting tired of this application. Others are indicating similar. I think that may be a way forward. But I guess that we might need advice as to whether, one, that is possible, etc.
Okay.
I think I'm going to let the planning officers discuss the matter about the changes to the application, because that's not, I don't think I sat when Kath gave that advice. I don't recall her ever giving that advice, so maybe I wasn't there. All I would say is, obviously, if you don't determine it, so we come back to the very basic principles. If you choose not to determine the application this evening, like you've rightly said, it's a right of appeal, and you have to consider the possibility of costs due to that being an unreasonable reason to appeal. I would question whether it's reasonable to not determine this application on the basis that the officer's recommendation is that there has been significant changes to the application. You've got to remember it has only actually come to committee twice because it came and then it was deferred, so it was technically all one application. This is only the second time it's been here, and obviously members have sat on lots of applications where the same site has come twice, if not 3 times, and have rightly sort of carried on to determine it because there's been changes to the application itself. So you just have to think about that before you make the decision not to determine the application. I'll let Graham and Suzanne respond on the other matter if they'd like to.
We'll probably revisit that. I've got 2 more people that I presume have got questions of the officer. 3 people. So if we take Councillor Holmes, and then I'll ask Graham to answer all of them in one go, I think. I have now.
I mean, I've already been told that as far as we're supposed to do, and this is what is annoying me, is that I'm supposed to just forget all of what's happening down there, and this particular build wants to not only build an unsightly forward-fronting house that can take up a lot of room and look ugly, right? But he also, within that proposal, for one sentence, he wants to live in it all year round because, as he says, he's took care of the flooding. He hasn't. If it floods, people have still got to go down there to get them out. It's still going to be a national disaster if it does flood. So it doesn't take care of the flooding, it just saves a life, which is one of the best things. But there's still a hell of a lot of work to do if we allow this. Because let's face it, if we allow this, we know that it's going to go on and on and on, and it isn't going to stop. So I'm definitely going to point to a refusal.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Holmes. Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've been sitting quietly listening, as I always do. I am concerned. There is already a precedent set in the area. You've only got to look down the road further down. There are much larger buildings than that this one is going to be. So the precedent is already there. That's the way I see it. The garden area is now bigger than it was originally. The changes have been made. I understand what everybody is saying. It's come back to us time and time again. 6.14 mentions how we are going ahead with JWIC and how that is working. And there have been several applications come to us here as a committee as to how we look to progress with JWIC. So we're already looking at that. Now, I understand where Councillor Everett is coming from, saying that non-determination, but surely we've all got concerns over this particular property, the site, the size of it, etc. Why can't we go for deferment to go back to the applicant and have a word with him? Because we as a whole are looking at, if we keep refusing it, it's going to come back and it's going to come back, and which is, I think, is what you don't want to do. If we looked at deferment, we've got to make sure that somebody somewhere is going to hold the whole thing together and just say, look, the committee are not prepared to agree that that's vast development on that area. And I just feel that that's where it's going at the moment. That's my personal feeling, and I would propose deferment.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yes, one quick question to the officers.
Can you put your microphone on? Mike, please.
One quick question to the officers. Is a 2-storey building considered flood-proof?
Chairman, yes, that's correct. But clearly, depending on the nature of the site, it might be restrictive in terms of the amount of accommodation you can then fit into the property. Hence, we've got 3 stories on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've waited till the end. I had asked before, but a lot of my questions have already been asked. But one of them was, yes, we are all for building houses that aren't going to be susceptible to floods but I consider that this is an overdevelopment of that site. And I'd be interested to know, in the 3 applications that have come before officers and the committee, the difference in the square meterage of these 3 applications, because they all look exactly the same size to me. And I agree with Councillor Brown that if it had just been the ground floor with garaging, utility, and a second floor with the living accommodation, I don't think anybody would have had a problem with that. It is just the overdevelopment of the site that is the main problem. It's unwieldy, it's out of character, and it just dominates the landscape. You can't compare it with the chalet bungalows opposite, which might be a bit higher. They have all got enough land around them. This is a carbuncle on a tiny little corner plot. So I would like to ask the square meterage, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benison. Before the officer answers that, I've got a couple of questions that sort of tie in with that. If you can go back to the slide showing that one, that's it. So the blue is what is there now, and the other...
Sorry, the pink one is what's there now. Yeah.
That's what's, sorry, pink. I'm colourblind, sorry, excuse me. The smaller one is what's there now, and that is what is proposed.
Yeah.
What I'd like to know is the size of what was refused. I know it's closer, the distance from the actual boundary to both, because although it's been set back, it's not as set back as what is already there. So it's already come forward, and I think I may be in agreement with some of my colleagues. There's not a lot of difference in what we're looking at. So if that can be answered, then, and any other comments you've picked up from everyone else, unfortunately.
Chairman, we don't have the floor space for the original scheme, but I think you're right. There's not a huge difference in terms of the floor space. I think that's fair to say. Right. It is slightly reduced, I think, would be the answer to that. Okay.
No, but the question was, with regard, if I can just borrow your point-to-pointy thing. Where's it gone? This is the property at the moment.
Yep.
The property, the first thing that came to this committee that was deferred and then refused, the front of the building was somewhere here.
Okay, let's just look at that.
And then it was refused again on delegated powers. Where was the... Where's he gone? Where was it forward with regard to this? Is it just edging backwards?
The first scheme that came before you, Chairman, as you can see, it is set slightly further back than the one you originally refused. I would say roughly there, it's about 2 metres back. It's now about 3 metres back, I would say. So it has been moved back slightly further. Clearly, the last scheme that came to the council, it's certainly a lot closer than the current scheme before you. I mean, I would say that's about a metre. Well, at its smallest point, it's probably no more than 800 millimetres, something of that nature. It's very close to the highway, and clearly that was completely unacceptable. But so the current scheme is certainly set further back than the previous two.
And I've just following up on what Councillor Holmes mentioned about wherever it was. Sorry. At the moment, at paragraph 6.2, the chalet has a restrictive occupation condition, which says here it's 4 months, although the lady who lived next door said it was 6 months. Can it be explained how, if we were minded to approve, that's a big if, I think, how that changes if this scheme was approved from not having that restrictive occupation condition on it? Thank you.
So in terms of the nature of the occupation of the dwelling, it would be a permanent use. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the chalet, the property that's there now has a restrictive condition, occupation condition to only it cannot be occupied. How does the fact, if this was approved and is replaced, how does that automatically just take away the restrictive condition?
Yeah. Yeah, Chairman, I think the restriction would continue because of the flood risk issue. That's the reason for that. So it would continue, even if this was approved, the restriction would still apply to the existing dwelling, or the existing building.
What about the replacement building? That's what I'm saying.
No, it wouldn't apply to. It would not apply to the replacement because the flood risk issue's been overcome. Yeah.
As Councillor Benison.
Thank you. I was just wondering if I could have an answer to the square meterage of all three applications, please.
Chairman, apologies, we don't have that figure before us, I'm afraid. We'd have to research that.
Can I just clarify something with members? I've scribbled it down that Councillor Alexander proposes refusal, question mark.
Can I come back?
Yeah, and Councillor Holmes seconds that. Yes. So I'd just like to confirm if that's what you proposed in one of your questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry, John, but listening to Councillor McWilliams, I have to say that I understood entirely what she was saying and I agree with her. I think I see exactly where you're coming from, but I think we need to give this at least one more bite of the cherry so they return it to us that, with either favour or disfavour in this case. So I would like to withdraw my my refusal.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah. Again, it's this whole thing. It keeps going back to Jaywick. You can't use Jaywick as a pedestal because it's always been livable. It's never had any holiday stay in it apart from when it was first built, which was for about a year. But since then, everybody goes down there, they stay in it. No one gets an enforcement notice taken against them in Jaywick. So therefore, this is, what we are dealing with here is a holiday let for a holiday area. I know there are places in there that are set up for living in, permanent living in, but just to prove a point, 67 enforcement notices have been issued, and yes, I can use that, because they've been issued against exactly the same property that it's being built on. But because he's building a 3-storey house, which supposedly is flood resistant, till it actually happens, we can't say anything about it. We've just got to allow this to go on. I think that the whole area boils down to holidays lets. That is what it is, a holiday let. Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, I think the answer to that is, I take the Councillor's point, but this area is a mix of holiday lets and permanent residential units as well, so that has to be taken into account. So I think, and at the end of the day, whether it's a holiday let or not, it is still classed as a dwelling in planning law, and therefore what's before us today is a scheme for a replacement dwelling. So it's changing from that. The fact the existing one's got a holiday let, it doesn't stop you looking at a permanent dwelling in this location. The law doesn't stop you doing that. But I take the point you're making.
So what you're saying is, what I've been saying all along, is that any of these 67 people want to build a house, if any of them have got any money at all and they want to build a house like the one that's being built, they're going to be given permission. We might as well not be here and sitting on it. We might just give it to them carte blanche.
Again, Chairman, it comes back to what I said earlier about every site is looked at on its own merits. That's what would be looked at. So, because we have to. That's the only way we can look at it. Yep.
Councillor Everett.
I'd like to second Councillor Williams' suggestion, please.
I think Councillor Alexander already had.
Oh, did you? Oh, right. In which case, can I third it, and can I add a little bit, which is that in the discussion, we've been talking about mass of the building, height of the building, and I do think that the mass of the building and the height of the building would, if it was done correctly, substantially change the situation here to something that might be acceptable to the committee. And so I would like to add to that suggestion that those two particular points, unless the committee feels there are other points they'd also like to add, should be brought to the attention of the developer. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to clarify then, can Councillor McWilliams and Councillor Alexander just confirm that they're happy with those reasons and add any extra reasons that they would like for deferment? Because obviously this happened last time with the application on the same site. We need to be really clear about what might make the application acceptable if it was to come back to us.
If I may, Chairman.
Yes,
Yes, I'm happy with those comments that were given to us by Councillor Everett, and just try and find something that we can actually agree on. There's more of us here than the one person that's trying to put in for the application, but I'm sure officers can obviously let the applicant know exactly our feelings here, and we would like to see that come back to something that is quite acceptable, and I think everybody knows what is acceptable, but it's trying to do it. I don't know how we can go through with that one, Charlotte.
No, we carry on.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but the indication from the planning officers is that it's quite difficult to go back with the information that we've got. If what you're really asking for is a 2-storey dwelling rather than a 3-storey dwelling, then that is obviously substantially different to the application, and perhaps you need to consider whether refusal is the way forward. If you think they could condense it down a bit by, and that would then be acceptable, then perhaps deferment is acceptable as an idea, but you need to be really clear about that. And obviously the planning officer's given sort of ideas about viability. A 2-storey dwelling might not really be viable. I don't know.
Can I... Hang on. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Can I ask Charlotte, could we, if we refused it, put a informative saying what we would find acceptable? Would that be the better way round?
It's unusual, Chairman, to say the least. I don't think I've ever come across that before. I don't think you would normally do that. I think the bottom line is what you're saying tonight will appear in the planning minutes to the committee, and that should say everything about your reasons and the background to it as to why you potentially would refuse it. So I'd say there'd be enough information out there to give that guidance to the applicant. I wouldn't put it as informative.
Councillor Holmes.
I'll put forward that we refuse the offer. And refusing it on all the same opinions that was before. Too near the front, too big in size, out of keeping with the area. And it's no longer a holiday let, and I still keep getting that in because it shouldn't be built as a private residential property. That's what we're here for, to stop things like that.
Chairman, can I...
Councillor McWilliams.
Can I just ask our solicitor, sorry to do this to you, if it was a suggestion to reduce it to, say, 2.5 storey and not 3, would that be any help?
It's not a matter for any of us to sort of make a decision on, is it? Ultimately, it would be down to the applicant to decide whether he thought that was a reasonable reduction, and if he didn't, he could appeal the decision to the inspector. Obviously, that's a conversation that the planning officers could have with the applicant, but it's all about judgment, and it's not, one thing is okay and one thing isn't, unfortunately. It would be lovely if I could give you a list of this would be okay and this isn't, but I can't. So you have to just put your hat on and think what might be reasonable. It's a judgment call.
Councillor Everett.
And in that vein, the trouble is this may just be as bad as the last one, is it possible for us to indicate that and make the point that the surrounding properties numbers 136 and 139, which is the one next door?
137.
137 and 139, that it should go no higher than the higher of those two, because that would be outside the street scene. So that would be something legitimately we could comment on, I think, unless I'm told otherwise. But, well, yeah, but
Yeah, okay. What you see my point.
Councillor Alexander.
As long as Councillor McWilliams is still happy to go with the deferral, I'm certainly happy to second that and withdraw from the refusal. But from what I can see, and my observation here tonight is that under 1.4 we are in fact trying to set aside the normal planning concerns in order to facilitate a development that could help set the tone. We're trying our level best to work around what the officers have requested us to do and to find the final solution. What that solution is, I have no idea. But I profoundly believe that deferral is the way forward.
Thank you. Question for the officers. If this committee is minded to defer, how or what? I know that the comments have been made. Is that going to get us any further along to a decision, whether it be approval or refusal?
Chairman, I think we've got a good feel for what members are looking for on the site, and certainly there's enough in my mind to go back to the applicants and say, look, we need another discussion about this. You know, can we revisit the design and come up with something which would be acceptable to the committee? Certainly there's enough in my mind to have that discussion with the applicant. So that's the answer.
Excellent, thank you. So the proposal before you from Councillor McWilliams and seconded by Councillor Alexander is to defer the application, and Charlotte's got all the reasons written down that you have made, because I haven't written them down, and obviously they're recorded. So unless anybody else wants to say anything before I put it to the vote. So those in favour of deferment, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And those against? 2. Then that proposal is carried. The matter is deferred for another date. Thank you.
I'm not going to comment on the last one. It normally would be for me now to thank you and close the meeting, but I would just say that originally on this agenda we had A5, which was Marsh Farm Cottage at Stony Lane, Brightlingsea, and we deferred that for further investigation, particularly about the ecology of that area, so that is now on the recording of this particular meeting. My understanding is that this will take some time and won't be brought before you next Wednesday, so it will come at a further date. With that, thank you all very much, and we will see you all on Wednesday. Remind you that there won't be any site visits next week because we've done that already. And with that, I close the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman.